Simile. Dear students, today we'll talk about simile. Simile, pronounced simile, is a literary term where you use like or as to compare two different things and show a common quality between them. A simile is different from a simple comparison in that it usually compares two unrelated things. For example, she looks like you is a comparison but not a simile. On the other hand, she smiles like the sun is a simile, as it compares a woman with something of a different kind, the sun. Now, this is an example. Her smile is as bright as the sun. Her smile is bright like the sun. Using the sun to describe a girl's simile gives you an idea of how bright her smile seems. You can just picture its radiance. Simile introduces vividness into what we say. Authors and poets utilize simile to convey their sentiments and thoughts through vivid word pictures. Difference between simile and metaphor. The technique of simile is known as a rhetorical analogy, as it is a device used for comparison. The other most popular rhetorical analogy is metaphor, which shares some traits and is often confused with simile. Though the difference is simple between the definition of simile and that of metaphor, it can be profound. While simile compares two things with the connecting words like or else, metaphor simply states that one thing is the other. For example, a simile would be he was as aggressive as a tiger in that argument, whereas a metaphor would be he was a tiger in that argument. Metaphors are thus subtler and can be stronger in a rhetorical sense because they equate the two things in comparison rather than just present them as similar. Similes, however, allow for truly bizarre comparisons that make the reader stretch to understand the connection between them. Here are some of the common examples of simile. There are many caged similes in the English language that we use regularly. Here are some examples. Strong as an ox, fit as a fiddle, bright as the sun, sweating like a pig, white as a sheet. His heart was as cold as ice, sleeping like a log, fast as lightning, dance like no one is watching. Here are some of the short examples of simile in a sentence. The glow of the tube light was as bright as the sunshine. Here, the glow of the tube light is compared to a sunshine. In winter, when it rained, he climbed into bed and felt as snug as a bug in a rug. Here, the person is compared to a snug in a rug. At exam time, the high school student was as busy as a bee. So, the student is compared to a bee. The student remains as busy as a bee during a high school exam. The beggar on the road looked as blind as a bat. The blindness of the beggar is compared to a bat. When the examination finished, the candidate felt as light as a feather. Here, the feeling of the candidate is compared to a feather, just as a feather is light. Similarly, the candidate has felt as light as a feather after the exams. When the teacher entered the class, the sixth grade students were fighting like cats and dogs. Here, the fight is compared to cats and dogs. The diplomat said the friendship of the two countries was deep as an ocean. Here, just as an ocean is very deep, we cannot measure the depth of the ocean. It is immeasurable. Similarly, the friendship between the two countries is immeasurable. The desert traveler's hope were dashed as when at last he reached a well It was as dry as a bone, just as a bone is dry. Similarly, the bell is as dry as a bone. The bell is compared to a dry bone. His opponent was trying to infuriate him, but he remained as cool as cucumber. Here, cucumber is regarded as very cool. So here the person is compared to a cucumber. The laborer remained busy at work all day long and slept like a log that night. Yes, sleeping like a log. Here the sleep of the laborer is compared to a log. Some of the examples of similes in literature. The first example is from the poem The Daffodils by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over waves and hills. Here, the poet envisions himself as a free cloud that floats alone in a blue sky above valleys and the mountains. By choosing this simile, Wordsworth describes his loneliness. Another example is from Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaves have all too short a day. Sometimes too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair sometimes declines. In the very first line, Shakespeare poses a question if he could compare his beloved to a summer's day, but then he rejects this idea and says that his beloved is better than that. This is an example of an extended simile. Another example is from the play Othello by William Shakespeare. It is the cause, my soul. Let me not name it to you. You chase stars, it is the cause. Yet I'll not shed a blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers than snow, and smooth as monumental alabaster. The last line here exhibits a beautiful use of simile by Shakespeare, where Othello compares Desdemona's smooth skin to alabaster. Another example is from Sonnet 130 by William Shakespeare. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. This excerpt from Shakespeare's Sonnet 130 is an example of a negative simile. Shakespeare goes against the expectation, praising his mistress's beauty, and instead says what she is not like. Her lips are not as red as coral, her skin is not pure as snow, and so on. This striking simile example plays with both the tradition of sonnet as well as the usual function of similes. Now, this is an example from prose from the novel by George Orwell's 1984. He sat as still as a mouse in the futile hope that whoever it was might go away after a single attempt. But no, the knocking was repeated. The worst thing of all would be to delay. His heart was thumping like a drum, but his face, from long habit, was probably expressionless. This passage uses two similes, as still as a mouse and thumping like a drum. Comparing the fearful man to a mouse emphasizes both his stillness and his helplessness. Comparing a heartbeat to a drumbeat emphasizes its pounding due to fear. Similes create a much more evocative passage than literal alternatives, such as he was afraid and his heart beat hard. The importance of using similes. Similes are an important tool that make language more creative, descriptive, and entertaining. The mind thinks in images and associations, so similes are used to make stronger and more effective descriptions. than if only adjectives or literal descriptions were used. They can stir up associated emotions, create new connections in the mind, and emphasize certain characteristics. Similes are almost essential to creative expression, from everyday speech to poetry. Significance of simile in literature. Simile can be an excellent way for an author either to make an unusual thing seem more familiar, that is, the planet Xenos was as cold as ice, or a familiar thing seem more unique, that is, her smile was jet like a broken zipper. In this way, similes can help the reader imagine the fictive world of a piece of literature. Good similes can also make readers think about things in a new way and can sometimes create a lasting effect. Scottish poet Robert Burns' declaration that is "love's like a red, red rose" forever linked the concepts of love and red roses in our minds. Simile can also sometimes be used to show a comparison, though with the conclusion that these two things really are unlike or even at odds with each other. This can either be a negative simile, which might come in the form of A is not like B, which communicates the opposite of what is expected at the beginning of the sentence. For example, the famous feminist quote, popularized by Gloria Steinem, "A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle," ultimately concludes that a woman has no need for a man. Simile can help to make new connections for the reader. One of literature's purposes is to help better explain the world around us, and the technique of simile is one of those ways in which we are able to see things in a new way. All types of analogies are cognitive processes of transferring meaning from one thing to another, and thus the use of simile in literature has real synaptic effects. For this reason and for aesthetic purposes, simile has been a popular literary technique for many hundreds of years. Thank you.